Welcome to our deep dive on choice architecture and behavioral economics. We're looking at the audiobook preview of Nudge, the final edition, by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. This preview is fascinating. It really gets you thinking about how we make decisions. You know how sometimes you feel like you're making choices freely, but something's subtly pushing you in a certain direction, like when they put the dessert right at eye level in the cafeteria?
Oh, that's the perfect example of choice architecture in action. The way information is presented, the order of options, even little details that seem insignificant can influence our decisions.
Right. And in Nudge, Thaler and Sunstein, who are experts in behavioral economics, really pull back the curtain on how this all works. They explain how choice architects can nudge us toward better choices. And these choice architects can be anyone, from cafeteria managers to policymakers. But the important thing is, this isn't about forcing anyone to do anything. It's about making it easier for people to make choices that are in their best interests. The book opens with this really cool visual illusion. It shows two tables that look completely different, but they're actually the same shape.
It's such a clever way to show that even our perception can be biased.
Mm-hmm.
And it really sets the stage for the book's main idea. We don't always make perfectly rational decisions.
So true. Then the authors introduce this concept of econs in humans. What's the distinction there?
Okay, so econs are like those perfectly rational beings from economics textbooks. They're always making the optimal choice. Humans, though, we rely on mental shortcuts to simplify decision-making. These shortcuts, called heuristics, can be helpful, but they can also lead to predictable biases in our thinking.
So heuristics are like mental shortcuts, and those can lead to biases, like with the anchoring bias. The book talks about how something as random as your phone number can influence your guess about a historical event. It just seems crazy. How could that even happen?
I know, it's wild, but it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah.
This anchoring bias shows how a totally irrelevant piece of information can affect our judgments. Like, we see this in negotiating prices, tipping in taxis. Our minds kind of latch on to that initial anchor, even if it's completely arbitrary.
So it's like when you see a really high price tag on something, and then even if it's marked down, you still feel like you're getting a good deal.
Exactly. It shows how easily our perceptions can be influenced.
Then there's the availability heuristic, where we judge risks based on how easily examples come to mind. Like, people might be more afraid of flying than driving because plane crashes are so vivid in our memory, even though statistically driving is much more dangerous.
Right. The media's focus on certain events can really distort our perception of risk, and it's a bias we need to be aware of when evaluating information.
So, okay, if we're all susceptible to these biases, does that mean we're not really in control of our choices?
That's not necessarily the case. Nudge argues that choice architecture is unavoidable. Someone's always designing the context for our choices, whether intentionally or not. So if we understand these biases, we can actually create environments that help people make better choices. And that's where the idea of nudging comes in.
So a nudge is sort of like a gentle push in the right direction.
Yeah, you could say that. A nudge is anything that alters people's behavior in a predictable way, without forbidding options or changing economic incentives too much, like automatically enrolling employees in a retirement savings plan. It makes it easier for them to save for the future, but they can still opt out.
So it's about making it easier to choose the option that's probably best for us.
Exactly.
And Thaler and Sunstein think nudges can be applied in so many areas, from saving money to health to protecting the environment.
Absolutely.
But this whole idea does raise an interesting question. If these subtle nudges are influencing our choices, are we truly free to choose?
It's a good question. And it goes to the heart of the ethical considerations around nudging. We have to remember that a nudge shouldn't be about coercion or manipulation. It's about gently guiding people in the right direction while letting them choose differently if they want.
It's like a GPS system. It suggests the best route, but you can always take a different path if you prefer.
I like that analogy. It shows how nudges can guide us without taking away our freedom.
So with nudges, it's this balance between individual freedom and trying to help people make better choices.
It's complex, and there's no easy answer. But I think transparency is key. People should know how nudges are being used, and they should be able to opt out if they disagree.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we're going to be nudged, we should at least know it's happening.
Absolutely.
Wow, this is giving me a lot to think about. I'm already starting to see the world differently. Now I'm wondering how many nudges I encounter every day without realizing it.
That's the thing about nudges. They're often operating below our conscious awareness. But once we understand how they work, we can become more conscious choosers.
Yeah.
And make decisions that are truly in our best interests.
Before we move on, I want to go back to some of the examples the authors used to illustrate these biases. We talked about anchoring, availability, and there's this one called the representativeness heuristic.
Ah, yes, that's a really interesting one. So
Yeah.
first, let's talk a bit more about the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy, that is, it's our tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take. Even when we have experience, we should know better. But
Oh, tell me about it. Like when I decided to reorganize my closet, I thought, oh, this will be an afternoon project, but it literally took me a whole week. I was drowning in clothes and storage bins.
it happens to everyone. We see this bias all the time. Writing a book, launching a product, planning a vacation. We always think it'll be quicker and easier than it actually is.
So then that brings us to the representativeness heuristic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. It's about how we judge probabilities based on how well something fits a stereotype. Like if you picture someone who loves to read and wears glasses, you might assume they're more likely to be a librarian than, say, a truck driver.
Yeah.
Even though statistically there are way more truck drivers.
Oh, so we make judgments based on how representative something seems, not on the actual probabilities.
Exactly. And while this heuristic can be helpful for making quick judgments, it can also lead to some pretty flawed thinking, especially when it comes to things like stereotypes and prejudice.
It's like our brains are wired to make snap judgments, but we really have to be careful about what we're basing those judgments on.
And that's where Thaler and Sunstein's argument for libertarian paternalism comes in. They argue that choice architects, those who design the context for our choices, they have a responsibility to help us overcome these biases.
So instead of giving us too many choices,
Yeah,
they can kind of nudge us toward options that are probably better for us.
exactly. They can use things like defaults, framing, and other tools
Yeah.
to guide us toward better choices.
So like in a cafeteria, they could arrange the food so that the healthier options are more prominent. People could still choose the chocolate cake if they wanted, but the nudge would make it a little easier to grab an apple instead.
That's a great example. Nudges can be really effective in the real world. They preserve our freedom to choose, while still encouraging people to make decisions that are good for them.
The authors seem to think this approach could be applied to almost anything.
Oh, absolutely. They talk about using nudges for all sorts of things, like encouraging people to save for retirement, donate organs, conserve energy, make healthier choices.
It's pretty amazing to think that we can create positive change just by being more thoughtful about how we design choices.
The potential is huge. And what's really cool about nudges is that they preserve freedom of choice, while still guiding people towards better outcomes.
But I'm sure some people might be a little skeptical of this whole idea. Like, wouldn't they be worried about the ethical implications? Is there a risk that nudges could be used to manipulate people?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And the authors address this directly. They emphasize that nudges should always be transparent and easy to avoid. It shouldn't be about tricking people into doing something they don't want to do.
So it's about making it easier to do what's in our best interests, not about forcing people into decisions.
Right. It's more about providing information and support, not coercion.
Sometimes I think our own minds are the biggest obstacles to making good decisions.
That's a really insightful point. We can be our own worst enemies when it comes to making choices that are good for us in the long run.
So how can we become more aware of these biases and nudges in our own lives? It feels like there's this whole hidden world of influences that we're not even conscious of.
Awareness is definitely key.
Hmm.
The more we understand about how our minds work, how these biases affect us, and how choice architecture influences us, the better we'll be at making informed decisions.
Well, just power, right?
Exactly. And the more we know about these biases, the less likely we are to fall prey to them.
And the more we can demand transparency from those who design our choices, whether it's our employers, the government, the companies we do business with.
It's a two-way street. We need to educate ourselves. But we also need to hold those who design choices accountable to make sure they're creating environments that support our well-being.
So it's a collective effort to create a world where choices are designed to help us thrive. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light. What kind of nudges am I being exposed to right now? What defaults are shaping my behavior online?
It's amazing, isn't it? Once you start to understand these things, you see the subtle influences all around you. Are there any areas where you think nudges could be particularly helpful?
Well, the authors talked about financial decision-making. It would be great if there were nudges to help people save more money, invest wisely, and avoid debt. I know I could use some nudges in that area.
Yeah, and they also talked about nudges in healthcare. Imagine systems that made it easier for people to develop healthy eating habits, exercise more, and take their medication.
So it's about making those healthy choices the easier choices.
Exactly. And the authors give some great examples of how nudges have actually been used successfully in these areas.
Like what? What kind of examples?
Well, one really effective nudge for retirement savings is automatic enrollment. So instead of making employees opt in to a retirement plan, they're automatically enrolled unless they choose to opt out. This simple change in the default option has been shown to increase participation dramatically.
So you're making it the easier option to save for retirement.
Exactly. And studies have shown that it's super effective. And the same principle can be used in other areas, like healthier eating. Some cafeterias have started putting healthier food options at eye level and making them look more visually appealing.
So you're making the salad look just as tempting as the pizza.
Exactly. By making subtle changes to the choice architecture, you can nudge people towards healthier choices without taking away their freedom of choice.
I love that. It's not about taking away choices. It's about making the healthier choice the easier choice.
That's the whole point of nudging, guiding people towards better choices while still letting them choose freely.
You know, you mentioned that this edition of Nudge has some new material. What are some of the new things they're talking about?
One really fascinating addition is a chapter on what they call sludge.
Sludge. What's that?
I know, it's a great term, right? They use it to describe all the unnecessary friction and hassle we face when trying to make choices or access services. Think about complicated paperwork, long wait times, confusing instructions.
Ugh. Don't get me started on sludge. It's like trying to navigate the DMV or deal with insurance companies. Sometimes it feels impossible.
Exactly. And the authors argue that this sludge can have a real impact on our lives. It can prevent us from getting important services or making choices that are in our best interests.
So what can we do about it? Is there a way to nudge our way out of this sludge?
Well, the authors suggest a few solutions, like simplifying forms, streamlining processes, and using technology to make things easier.
So it's about making things as frictionless as possible.
Exactly. They argue that reducing sludge should be a top priority for both governments and businesses.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that.
And they give some compelling examples of how reducing sludge can lead to positive outcomes for everyone.
It's crazy how these small changes in design can make such a difference. It really makes you appreciate the power of nudges.
The best part is, it's a process of continuous improvement. The more we learn about nudges, the better we can design systems that support our well-being.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I'm definitely more aware of the choices I'm making and the subtle influences that might be at play.
That awareness is so important. It empowers you to take control of your choices and create a life that's in line with your values and goals.
So we've talked a lot about how nudges can help people make better choices, but I'm curious about the potential downsides. Could nudges ever be used to manipulate people or take away their freedom of choice?
It's a really important question, and it's something the authors talk about directly in the book. They stress that ethical nudges should always be transparent and easy to avoid. A nudge shouldn't be about tricking people into doing something they don't want to do. It's about making it easier for them to choose what aligns with their goals, while still giving them the freedom to choose differently.
So like hiding the healthy food in the cafeteria wouldn't be a good nudge.
Exactly. A good nudge makes it easier to make a good choice, but it never takes away the option to choose something else.
It's like those choose your own adventure books. You have different options, and the nudge might point you toward one path, but you're always free to choose a different one.
I like that analogy. The authors say this approach is especially helpful in areas where people might not have the time, information, or willpower to make the best decisions.
Like with saving for retirement, it's so easy to procrastinate on that, but something like automatic enrollment can make a huge difference.
Right, it helps people overcome that inertia and make choices that benefit them in the future. But they can still opt out if they want to.
It makes you realize that sometimes we're our own worst enemies when it comes to decision making.
Absolutely. We all have these biases and mental shortcuts that can lead us astray. Nudges can help us navigate those pitfalls and make choices that are more aligned with our long-term goals.
So in a way, nudges are helping us be more rational.
Yeah, you could say that. They help us overcome those impulsive, short-sighted tendencies. But it's not about forcing rationality on anyone. It's more about providing guidance and support.
The authors also talk about how there's no such thing as a neutral choice architecture. What do they mean by that?
It means that every decision we make is presented to us within a certain context, a choice architecture, whether it's the layout of a website or the order of options on a ballot. And that architecture inevitably influences our choices, even if it's not intentional.
So even if you're trying to be neutral, you're still nudging people in some direction.
That's right. There's no way around it. So the question becomes, how can we design choices in a way that nudges people toward positive outcomes?
That's what makes it so interesting. It means we have a responsibility to think carefully about the choices we present to others and how those choices are framed.
I agree. The authors argue that we need to shift our thinking from just offering options to actually designing choices that support people's well-being.
It's like instead of just giving someone a toolbox, you're showing them how to use the tools and helping them build something amazing.
Exactly. And they believe this approach has the potential to make a real difference in areas like healthcare, education, environmental protection.
It makes you wonder what we could accomplish if we were all more mindful of the power of nudges.
It's exciting to think about. Imagine a world where it's easier to save for retirement, eat healthy, exercise, and make sustainable choices.
It sounds almost too good to be true. But it all comes down to how we use these nudges, right? We have to make sure we're not crossing the line into manipulation.
Definitely, transparency is crucial. People should always know when they're being nudged, and they should have the freedom to choose differently.
It's a tricky balance, finding that sweet spot between helpful guidance and overreach.
You're right. But I think if we understand choice architecture and have open conversations about it, we can use nudges to create a world that's better for everyone.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. It's really changed how I think about decision making.
Me too. It's amazing how these subtle influences can have such a big impact.
So as you go about your day, dear listener, pay attention to those nudges. Are they helping you or are they leading you astray? The power to choose is ultimately in your hands. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of choice architecture. It's a topic that can really change how we think about decisions and help us create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.